All right, I'm sure some more will pop in yet, but I appreciate everyone taking the time to stop in today. Like I said, I asked for people to quickly skim the pre-proposal just to refresh yourself. And we could go around and do introductions, all that kind of thing, but it'll eat up 15 minutes or something like that. I think you can read the little paragraph at the end of the pre-proposal, or the page and a half has all of us there. And here comes Kyle. So you'll kind of get that. What I'd like to do quickly is just do the overall institute vision, the 3 AI themes and the climate smart topics, and then move into like the meat of the discussion. From what I guess the long-term goal we're trying to get to is increased adoption, widespread development, adoption of these climate smart technologies, some of which will rely on AI methods that have yet to be developed. That's the way I would describe it. And the emergence of this portfolio of these practices is going to require some fundamental advances in AI, and that's why we're here. And to widespread adoption is going to require some trust in the AI technologies and the practices. So that's kind of the motivating theme. And from the preliminary discussions, we kind of have 3 AI, we'll call them themes, is what Kyle and I kind of came up with several of you. Decision-making and optimization in an uncertain and non-stationary environment, multimodal and multi-scale modeling, data and modeling, social themes sort of connecting to communication and leading towards trust and trustworthy AI. That's the big 3. That's where we need fundamental advances in. The use-inspired topics are crops. That's my work, and I've got a page version of what that is. I think that lies largely on the optimization theme. Livestock will be Zhao Dorea, and so he's got a team pulled together. Forestry is Volker Radulov. He's got a theme. Soils, Jingyi, I saw him on here. And then food security, I see Craig Gunderson's on, that's his area. I know the climate smart side people much better than I know the people what I'd call on the AI side. And so I'm always a little more hesitant to connect. I don't understand you. I don't know you people. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I'm just learning. That's what we're up to and who's here, and what we're talking about. What I'd kind of like today, because time is short, it's due May 13th. Research and sponsored programs here at UW-Madison is kind of short-staffed like everything else in the private world. And so we need to get moving on it. I'm guessing they'll have an internal deadline before then. Budget, as usual, is the hardest part to get done. And that's like the first thing you do, but you kind of have to know what you're budgeting for in order to design your objectives and stuff. So what I've done, I bounced off Kyle and I've sent some of this to some of you already, is tentative rough budget outlays to kind of target ourselves. So we know what we're doing. The primary focus of this is it's an AI institute. The climate smart part is sort of the application, or as they call it, the use inspired. Doesn't quite get to applications necessarily. The heart of the institute is artificial intelligence. And so that's where the preponderance of the larger share of the budget is. You've seen the numbers there, thinking roughly 8 million of the 20 million. Kyle and I kind of put together some ideas, like 4 postdocs, 4 graduate research assistants, a couple research software engineers, and summer salary. How that's organized, I don't know. They have to be tied to those themes, the decision-making optimization.
Can I inject really quickly? The research software engineers, I sort of see as being like a community resource for the entire institute. So you can stick it in the AI side, but I think they're going to be, anyone can draw upon them, and that's they're expensive. So to keep that in mind. And then of the 4 postdocs, like a kind of nominal proposal would be 1 postdoc for each of the 3 themes, and then 1 kind of fellow that has like more academic freedom to try to do something, interesting. We had some ideas there about, potentially, having a fellow whose theme is broadly like AI that's inspired by things on the kind of, ag forestry side of things, in terms of it being like, instead of being neuro inspired or biologically inspired, it's more like ecologically inspired or something like that. which I think actually could tie into some, actually have some meat behind it. But
Yeah, thank you. I think, to be honest, from my perspective, that's the biggest struggle right now. I see we got to get some clarification and solidification on the AI side. And like I said, I'm very comfortable with the climate smart ag and forestry side because that's where I work. And we need, some of you all are on, I can see your names and stuff. That's what I was talking about there, identifying leaders. I think we need to find how we're going to consolidate, clarify, crystallize around themes and objectives within the AI side on those two themes, or maybe you want to redefine and make adjust those themes. The third AI theme is life science communications, but I'd say LSC, and we've got roughly $1 million there. That's technically AI, but it's on that side. And then the climate smart people, that's about 6 million broken out into the crops, livestock, food security, forestry, and soils. A couple million for outreach. I see Dennis Toddy's on. I would kind of consider him part of the outreach side, not just the research side. And then we've kind of got some project management for some support staff. We technically threw the travel budget in there, but I think we'll redistribute that out to the groups. So I guess what I'm saying is, the way I've been telling this to the climate smart people is, here's your target budget of X dollars. How would you define your objectives and procedures to work towards that? And what would you do with it? That kind of thing. So, and I've reached out to all of them separately already over the weekend. They kind of have that target budget amount. I kind of think we need someone on the decision-making optimization and on the multimodal data and modeling to do the same, to kind of become the leader and say, okay, here's 2 million on this, here's 2 million on that. How are you guys going to define it? I'd like to pause there. I don't know, Kyle, if you want to add more there, but I'm looking for is, how do we get this AI folks organized and structured? That's what I'd like to say, I guess.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll say a little bit. I mean, one, in terms of like what would make sense research-wise, given the problems and the people that we have, there are ideas that come to mind that we discussed a little bit in a previous meeting. But like from the, from the point of view of, there's we have a lot of expertise that's more traditional kind of operations, research, optimization style, linear programming, et cetera. And then there's approaches that have to do with, combinatorial optimization, et cetera. But that fits in broadly into the way they write it. But I'm guessing when they actually view it, they're going to want to see things look more kind of deep learning-esque. And a lot of our, ag and forestry, where there's applied machine learning, you see a lot of computer vision and things like that. So there's a bit of a gap, and it would be nice to close that. I found that there's some, pretty compelling research that's going on, which use, for instance, like graph neural networks and things like that together in the context of things like combinatorial optimization, that fits quite well into that theme. But we don't really have people at UW that I'm aware of that are doing the kind of more on the kind of deep learning-y looking side of that. And we don't necessarily need to, but I think it would help the proposal. There are potentially people we could reach out to, but we've already got a big group. So that's, I guess, one side of it. There's, there, from the multi-scale, whatever modeling side, I mean, there's, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to remember. I've been, this is like my 5th meeting in a row, so I'm a little transitioning, but well, it's not currently in my head, but, and from our previous meetings and talking, there were credible lines of research and things that could be, could argue that all make sense, but we've assembled people that I think are all relevant, but we need to make progress in terms of making it more concrete. I don't know, to some extent, for the proposal, how much we need to I think some of the budget can say we're going to put this much effort on these topics without and then try to make a pitch for what we think would make sense in terms of the research. And I don't know that there needs to be a lot more work in terms of connecting budgetary things. I mean, we can maybe it could just be fairly simple. Like, we're going to have research, we're going to have postdocs and graduate students on these topics. And then we just need to argue the research case and what the work plan looks like and who's going to oversee that. I don't know. Paul, you're just talking about on the climate smart part that it's getting very granular in terms of assigning. I mean, one thing I worry about a little bit, it's good to distribute it, but then we're going to need to aggregate all that stuff into a proposal that reads as a coherent whole, right? So so there's some balance between that delegation and then also the making it all fit together again. I don't know, from the kind of our AI crew, does anyone want to sort of comment on so you know, from looking at the previous notes from last time, Yelena had also, you know, hot topics in machine learning, that we had predictions based on existing data, and then moving like distributional shift issues, that we definitely have that. That happens in several places where we might have data from like one farm or one area, and there's relatively limited data, and we want to make some, you know, predictions or deploy some system in some different location. And that, you know, being robust to that, there are many places where we're going to be relatively data starved. So doing things where you like integrate some kind of simulation or some kind of domain expertise is interesting. And then there's a lot of decision making, but it's not going to be trained off of like some kind of typical reinforcement learning type. It's got to look more like, you know, like optimal control or something like that. So that we had also talked a little bit, Yelena and Michael Ferris both talked about the kind of systems that interact with humans, and the kind of, you mentioned Michael Jordan's work where there's not really a fixed objective, but there's some kind of interaction between the system, you know. So if we're talking about, you know, like, because it's economics and interacting with farmers and et cetera, that's going to be a potentially interesting, you know, foundational area that we could develop more. I'm just looking back. I dropped the notes in the chat so you can see kind of what we discussed last time. And we also talked a little bit, which I think was important but didn't necessarily review super well, was about developing kind of benchmarks and things so that that people can, you know, that people are not working on benchmark problems that don't reflect reality, but they're things that are more closely related to like real world systems. So I think that that's important actually, but we have to write it in a way that sounds compelling.
What I think granularly, because I mean, that's how I've been successful in the USDA grants. You got to look like you know what you're doing, even if you don't do it, or even if you don't know what you're doing. Looking that way helps on the USDA grants. And this is my take on how to connect up with the AI people. I thought of 3 objectives for the crops unit. And I could go through the explanation, but like the first one is, there's a lot of information out there already on, you know, remote sensing, remote, not necessarily from satellite on down to field level sensors, and just extracting more information from that. Zhou Zhang is not on today. She's in BSc, but that's what she does already. And the first objective was sort of things I think we could do now. We could use some input from some of the, well, I'll just lump in everyone together as AI people, some help, some advice, what terms look for, maybe a little algorithmic tweaking or something like that. Here's our idea, what we're doing. Can you help us improve it? Oh yeah, tweak, and it's better. Objective 2 then is much more, it needs engagement. This would be a reinforcement, a deep learning reinforcement, sort of like a system of sensors or observational, and dealing with the sequential decision-making problem throughout the season of, you know, optimizing water or something like that. I got this sense network. I can see what's going on in my field. Do I apply irrigation water today or not? If so, how much? Wait till tomorrow. Same thing over and over again. And I've got a former student who's kind of worked that out. That isn't ready for the real world yet. He's been training it on a AppSim, a model, a simulation model. It's out of Australia where he is, but they use it a lot of places. And developing that algorithm, and then that, I think we can do some of that, but we need engagement from people that work on that kind of stuff. And then our third objective is much more, I'd call it pie in the sky. It's further out where, in essence, we kind of see the problem, but we would like somebody that has the theoretical background and to help us figure out how to do with it. And that's optimizing on-farm experimentation. We have all the tools in terms of equipment, you know, remote sensing. We've got micro scale control of inputs. We can observe yields. We can set up experiments, but how do we optimize that experimentation process? That is something that's just beyond our capacity. We can see the potential for it, but we need to develop like a batch mode. It's not, you don't do iteration upon iteration. You can't do 10,000 iterations. You can do 10,000 sites in 1 year and come back next year and do 10,000 more sites. It's a batch mode. It's not and that's something we kind of put in as an objective, but to be frank, it's completely beyond our capacity. And that's kind of what I'm asking the other people to do in the other climate smart areas, the forestry, et cetera, to think about something you can do immediately, something you can have some engagement with the AI people and do a better job in, and then something that's completely out there that we think we can do, have no idea if it's really even worth working on, but we think it is. That's kind of, short-term, midterm, long-term dream.
Yeah. So one thing there is like, my reading of the solicitation and the pre application was that they had something very similar, which was they wanted us to identify machine learning techniques that are basically out there now on the applications front. Then they wanted use inspired, and then they wanted foundational. And the use, the foundational was the most long term, et cetera, and to make some case for like, what's new. And the use inspired, the way I see it is sort of transitioning from, you're taking inspiration from a particular application, you're trying to identify what is difficult about the problem and why current things don't really work, but then kind of abstract that and away so that it gets framed more as a kind of pure basic research problem. So I think it would make sense for us to have activities that are like very thoughtfully trying to scope and identify what is it that's difficult or hard about this problem. And then, some of the activities can be, to actually write that stuff up, in a way that, is kind of ready for more machine learning AI, foundational researchers to understand and take on. And that's why I thought also that the kind of benchmarking stuff makes sense, because we can have a dedicated effort to define the problems, in a well-scoped way, have data sets associated to them and things like that. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. It's just a question that, we have to be a little careful because that part, even though I think it makes a lot of sense, didn't review super well. But I think if the three things, the short-term, midterm, and long-term, we can think of as roughly aligning with like applications, use-inspired, and foundational research. And we also talked a little bit about kind of rows and columns where we can imagine that we have the kind of three topics that we picked, in terms of, and then the three, the applications, use inspired, and foundational research. Yelena and Rob, please.
Just a couple of things that, at least from my point of view, would make things easier, and that's just I like to be practical about things, and the first one is can we have a shared document we can start working on, which could be like an overlay file that we can all edit. Then once there is some structure in the document, that would also make it easier to think about how to fill things in. And I think would also make it easier for people like me to start writing things, especially once there are parts about applications themselves that provide context. Because in the previous meeting, there were multiple things that were mentioned that talked about, oh, these are the specific problems that we want to solve. These are the specific problems that we care about, and we don't know how to do that. Things like that give at least me something to work with, because then I can say things, oh, this looks like A or B, and then we can iterate between like, our understanding and the understanding of people who work on the application side. I've read through the pre-proposal again, and one thing that I think was not present there, at least not to high enough degree, was the structure of the form. Here is what the problem is that we want to solve. Here is the most obvious way one would try to solve it, and for which there is rich literature on the AI side. but this is super specific to this problem, and this is what makes it unique to our application, and here is where our innovations are going to be. Now, the final part, based on what was mentioned so far, in terms of the leadership on the AI side, and Rob will talk about that, I would kind of rely on people like Rob and Michael Ferris to do that part, since they already have a lot of experience in leadership and have a very broad view of the field.
Yeah, can I, thank you, that's very helpful. So definitely we'll set it up. We already have like an existing shared drive. So I guess there's a question if for this first round, it would be better to have like a Google Doc, which is kind of, nice for editing and not like, or if we want to go straight to Overleaf and LaTeX, I guess it depends a little bit. But in terms of what the thing that the pre-proposal, I completely agree that kind of stuff was missing. Partially, we were relatively confined by the pre-proposal in terms of format. We had to answer those questions in blue. So like, but we could have done better. I agree. But but there were definitely some confines. But for the final proposal, that's not the case in the same way. So we should definitely hit on it, like you said. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Elena. Those are good points. I do think, I guess Michael Ferris isn't here. He would be a great person to talk with about kind of organizing the AI side a bit, just because he's worked with the egg side quite a bit. He might be able to help translate a bit for us. So maybe we can try to set up a meeting with some subset of folks that are quote unquote the AI side. Going back to Paul's three kind of points, two of them were sort of sequential decision making based on sensor network data, and then the other one was optimal experimental design, sequential experimental design on the farms. There was this batch mode kind of constraint. These are all problems that I and others have worked on. So I think there's a lot we could contribute there. And then going back to the first one, there was something about like, well, we already have expertise that can use deep learning methods to extract information. I don't know if it was from remote sensing, but maybe some AI experts could come in and help tweak it. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, Paul. I wasn't quite clear what that first thing was all about.
A little bit. I'm describing what Zhou Zhang does. She has a bunch of machine learning publications already, and I'm paraphrasing her work and saying I think she's done stuff within her field, and I think all of us can gain from collaborators who know more than we do about certain aspects. And that's what I'm really saying. I have a feeling.
Is she like, is it remote sensing data? Is it imagery? What's the?
I think it's things like predicting crop yields from satellite data. Looking at a crop field, or, I think it's 30 meter pixels, is what they are. And that estimating yields, estimating alfalfa status and how close it is to harvestability. That's with satellite data. Right. Maybe Brian, you know more about her program?
Yeah, she's also using hyperspectral cameras on UAVs to get a high resolution image. She's worked on our alfalfa plots and others, predicting yield, predicting quality, predicting other things using machine learning and those hyperspectral sensors.
Yeah, great, good. That's helpful. Yeah, I think probably there are ways that a number of us could help out, or at least contribute to enhancing those kinds of things. I mean, we have Youngjae Lee, who's listed here. He's an expert on computer vision. A lot of that's a little bit more classification based, but I don't know. Depends what granularity you're talking about in terms of predicting yield. Is it sort of quantized, like poor, good, excellent, or is it like a real scale of yield? But at any rate, I think there's a lot of ways we could help out with all three of those things you mentioned, Paul. And maybe getting a sense of what things are that you have done or others have done, and then we could kind of chime in with what would be the pie in the sky thing, and then what kinds of AI innovations are going to be needed to get there. I think there's a lot we could say, but it's going to take some discussion with a few people back and forth on some of these topics. So if there was a couple of people on your side of the business for each of those topics, then we could match them up with a couple of people on our side and have some one-on-one or two-on-twos or whatever.
That's what we're looking for, exactly.
Yeah.
And we just don't know who. That's on, I
Yeah.
can name the crop people, but I don't know who they are on the.
Yeah, so if
And
somehow we
LNS.
can identify those crop people groups, and maybe get, again, 2 or 3, just so we keep the numbers sort of manageable
Manageable.
in terms of getting together and meeting up, then I and Elena and Michael, we could probably say, okay, yeah, for this topic, let's get, a few of us together, maybe Jim Lutke and somebody else needs to be on in this one. And so
Okay.
I think that's how we should do it. Maybe we could even organize part of the Google Doc that way, like here are like, these 3 topical areas, or maybe there are more. Here are some soil science people who have the expertise. And then here are some AI people who have the expertise and or interest and want to get involved. And then we can set up some side meetings with those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that there's already, I think the organization, the grouping is like relatively, maybe not fully, but there's a pretty obvious grouping for several of the people. So we can go ahead and do that and maybe give a little bit of in the doc, we could also give a little bit of a primer of, in the discussion, try to come back with like kind of answers to the following questions, similar to like what Yelena just said, and also framed a little bit in terms of what our reading of what they're looking for in the proposal in terms of use inspired and foundational stuff.
Sounds great. And just sorry, I missed the timeline thing again. Can you just remind me? I want to make sure I record that for myself.
Yeah, it's May 13th is the actual due date. And like I said, RSP seems to be pushing for earlier finalization, but usually the first thing important is the budget, and then we finish up the narrative and all that other stuff.
We've got a month.
Exactly. So not a ton of time, but still enough.
I thought I heard April 13th, and I was starting to really get nervous.
No.
Okay, a little better. June 13th would have sounded even better, but yeah, okay.
April 13th, you get an email that says we're not doing this, guys.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, guys.
Great. Guillermo, you have your.
Yes, let me. So I'm in the Department of Animal and Dairy Science working. So I'll be contributing on the livestock component of the applications, right? But thinking about this discussion on the foundational component, AI or machine learning mostly, one way, just throwing an idea, but one area that would be interesting maybe to develop things and would link all things together is that in agriculture, we have correlated data, right? And if you look at from the economics, like the time series, so repeated measurements, or in my area, the genetics, we have familial relationship between individuals. If you go to soil science, so you have spatial clustering of observations. So we've been analyzing data with using mixed models that was born in agriculture, in genetics actually, or some other like time series models for the economics and so forth. But the traditional machine learning methods assume independence between observations, right? And now, of course, we have some methods being developed in terms of this, long short memory algorithms for space for temporal data, or I think Kayo mentioned the graphical neural nets. So I think these would be an area interesting for some development, because these models would be for sure used in the applications with the sensor technology, with the genomic information. So that would be one way how to implement machine learning methods with correlated data.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. I think and well, there's also, I mean, there are the various places that things break down between having like IID data and a versus something where we see like distributional shift going from, like transfer learning from one farm to another or something, or things where shifting is a function of time. And then the most, pernicious is probably when you have feedback of what your system is doing on the actual environment itself, right? So, I think we should somehow, point. Well, I mean, I kind of wish that we could say, you know, a little bit more like this is the problem that we're trying to solve on the climate side, and then these are the relevant tools. But it does look like there's kind of in terms of the way that it's going to be evaluated, there are going to be some people that are really looking for, you know, deep foundational AI advances that are motivated by this setting. So we will definitely need some text that plays to that, you know.
Your point, though, Jeremy, is Volker's right up on forestry is kind of that same point, that there's all this spatial and temporal autocorrelation, and developing methods with large data sets to tease that out. But I don't know how that fits in exactly to, I mean, he's trying to tease out climate trends. But I think that's almost more of a statistical problem, I think, on how to deal with that. I just, it's not my area, that's what I'll say. But what I really want to say is Volker Radeloff on the forestry side has kind of pointed that same general problem. So maybe Chris Carn's not on, but he's a stats person, so maybe he's interested in that. I don't know. Okay. Any other thing people want to discuss? Otherwise, I found might go down the agenda a step or two.
Can I just ask quickly if people are in general agreement that at this stage that a Google Doc might be more flexible before moving to the CSAF?
Yeah, actually, it's already in there, and I posted the link. It's called Project Description 1. It's just under, you go into the shared drive and look under Proposal Work, and then you look at Project Description 1, and it's just an initial draft. There's nothing, there's not even any references yet, but it's got the blue text is the stuff from the RFP or our request for applications, and then the black is just beginnings of texts. And then I have a one-page version of that crops example I've sent out to some of the other people in climate smart ag and forestry, of kind of how I'm structuring that 3 objectives: the short-term, mid-term, long-term, or current, use inspired, and then foundational work.
I mean,
and then so
it would make sense to have a sort of separate document that's not straight to the project description, which is more of what Rob was talking about, like trying to organize these groups.
Okay.
Kind of scratch area. I mean, I can make that, or is that too?
I think someone should do that then. I don't quite that. I'm up for that. Make one for each of the areas. If you want,
I'll make something. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, keeping an eye on the time, we're at half an hour. I think
Miss and Lena both have their hands up.
Go for it, whoever.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add one more thing to the discussion because it hasn't been brought up before. And the thing is, when you look at these AI institutes and how things work, in addition to the scientific part, which I'm sure we can all work out and, you know, have a scientifically strong proposal, there has to be some excitement about the AI Institute at the end of the day and among the people who end up reviewing the proposal. Now, traditionally, when it comes to applications of AI, you know, people will think about discovering stars, curing cancer, understanding better the genetics and so on. And, you know, agriculture and forestry are not your sexiest applications. I'm sorry, but it is true. And but they are important, right? And we are talking about climate changes and we are all going to be impacted. And this is in media all the time, but it's not the most obvious connection of AI and this specific set of issues. And I think maybe we should also think about how to embed that into the proposal, you know, so that it is clear, you know, we are aware this is not the most obvious thing to look at, but it is super important. And among other things that we will accomplish from the scientific side, we will also draw the attention of AI community who does not really normally look into all these issues, if that makes sense. I think it's kind of hinted on maybe somewhere in the proposal, maybe also when it comes to benchmarking, but could we make that just a bit more explicit?
I hear your message. That's sort of, I always think of agriculture as become a utility. You don't think about it until it doesn't work, just like the electrical power, garbage, sewage, things like that. you don't think about it unless it doesn't work. And so I hear you. What I hear you saying is building some more excitement about it. I think we can. But that's a good point. The audience isn't just agriculture talking about to each other. It's got to bring in non-agricultural people, and they are going to have some of those implicit. This is not an exciting thing. Why are we doing this? Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, to riff off that a little bit, I'm bothered that you don't call agriculture exciting. Hey, since that's what I do all day.
I know, but that's our little world.
I know it. And because I guess to play off that a little bit, I wasn't getting excited about some of the things that were delivered to people to use. Yield forecasting, okay, or water usage. These are kind of okay, but they're not game changers in any of this. And she was bringing up the idea of climate change. And that's when you're talking about climate smart agriculture, that's where you're really talking about how do we get practices and understand practices and how they work. There's a huge call right now for how climate smart practices work. There's going to be a bunch of data hopefully coming out in the next couple of years about their practices and their implementation. So we can't guarantee the data is going to be there, but that would be a really neat thing to handle on some of these larger scale issues. So we can talk about that more. I am concerned about the connection of what is created with how it's used and who's going to use it. Because there's got to be a real serious conversation about that. That's one. Two, just from a domain perspective, I got this vibe that it's very Wisconsin specific. Is that true? That our thinking is it's very, or we're trying to figure out how we're going to take data from Wisconsin and expand it from a larger area. From a regional perspective, which is what we do, I need some clarity on that, on how we engage in this.
It's not Wisconsin specific. It's broader than that. It's just that it's UW specific. It's really, the institute's gonna be housed at University of Wisconsin. But it's not meant to be Wisconsin specific by any means.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. And we have to be careful. Since it's loaded with a lot of Wisconsin people, we have to be careful about that. But I think, Dennis, you're hopefully can help with that. And so if you have thoughts and suggestions and requests or whatever, please say, speak up with that.
Let's hear from Dietram. We got a whole bunch of hands up. I think we should just go to Dietram. You're next, I believe.
Yep, thank you. And this is all great. And I want to follow up on something Yelena said. And I thought she was also going, I agree with what you said, but I also thought you were going in an additional direction, and that is the institute nature of things. And I do think that's both substantively important for the proposal, but it's also operationally important for how we write. Meaning, how do we actually envision the structure of the institute and people collaborating with one another? So when they talk broadly about a multidisciplinary group of scientists, engineers, and educators that don't just do the AI, but also make sure that it reaches, the consumer, not consumer end market, but that innovation reaches these different stakeholders. I think one thing that'd be super useful for me, and I don't have a good grasp on it yet, is an understanding of what the institute will do that individual grants wouldn't do. So, this could all be funded separately, but we're funding something that is partly about a particular type of domain science at the moment, but also domain science that doesn't exist yet that will develop, and where that institute will prepare us better than separate projects would. How does that integrate with the kinds of work about education, workforce development, reaching diverse audiences, all the stuff that are hit in the high level bullet points in the call for proposal? And I think the more we have that structure in our mind, what is cross-cutting, what are some of the key pillars that we're building on, almost like a visual representation, the easier it will be to write toward that, the easier it will also be to say, well, we're going to do the following things that will be directly informed by what the AI group is doing or by what the crop science group is doing. And when I say we now, I mean Kai Ping and myself and others that do work in that space. So I think that's one thing that we want to sort out early on. And then the only other thing that doesn't worry me, but I think that we want to front load is think about partners and getting letters sooner rather than later, especially as they're talking about, partners from underserved populations and so on and so forth. Not our strong suit in Wisconsin to have really deep outreach in some of these communities. So I think doing a little bit of early work on that will be helpful. And I'm flagging this partly because I'd be happy to help with those things, but I think it would be really useful as we start contributing to the document.
Okay, I hear you loud and clear. I also want to respect the next ones. We got some ideas there, but that's the outreach group, and we haven't had time to talk about that. But I also agree about that visual representation. You might have helped volunteer for that group, but we'll see. Karen, I want to hear from you, and Guillermo is the other one, and then, yeah, we've got time yet.
Hi, I'm Karen Garrett, helping nationalize it by being at the University of Florida. And also I put in the chat a link to a paper that is pretty inspiring to me. I think that one way to make a project like this exciting is to have built into it the idea of scaling up. So even if a lot of the activities are in Wisconsin, if there's the idea that it's testing out ideas for scaling up, in one location. Well, that link that I put in the chat is about a global surveillance system for crop diseases. And so there are tons of possibilities for AI in a system like that. And maybe it'd even be interesting to think about how to use AI for improved capacity building. That could be an interesting angle. But so I guess that's my 2 cents. I think that case studies with the built-in idea of scaling up and maybe even testing scaling up would be one way that would make it exciting to me. It seems like if you can talk about making something global, it's automatically more exciting in some ways.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, that's the reason you were invited, I believe, is that paper that you worked on. And I think your colleague, you don't know if you met her before, but Catherine Makalembe is kind of has similar interests as you, use different data sets and stuff. But I agree and she's at Maryland.
Just adding, so throwing ideas also, again, for the foundational component. Someone mentioned optimal design for experiments. So 2 comments here. So this would be interesting, but especially optimal design in the context of machine learning models, right? Because we have a lot of theory developed in the statistical community for optimal design when you are thinking about a linear model to analyze the data. But so how would you design and optimize experiments for a machine learning analysis? And then the other thing is that we are going to be working mostly with observational data, if I understand. Like when you talk about yield prediction or disease surveillance, as we just saw here, the link that Karen sent. So again, optimal experiments and observational experiments. So how to optimize? So variables that you are missing that you need to collect, or maybe you're collecting too many. You are looking, I don't know, soil quality every day and you don't need. So I think this would be an interesting way, or another component to do some theoretical research.
Yes, I think you're right about the observational data. All right, what I'd like to do, given our watch, we've got 15 minutes roughly for an hour. I kind of like to, I think we've got a plan for we'll call it the topical stuff. I think I want to kind of think about the other areas at the end of the agenda, the broader impacts, ethics plan, data management plan, postdoc, and facilities and equipment. But so in the short term, we need to kind of build some structure around the ways like Rob and Kyle have been talking about, and Elena, and then moving into that broader impacts, connecting to partners like Dietram talked about. I'm just going to start asking, we're looking for leaders who wants to work on the broader impact section, the outreach, workforce development. We've mentioned Kyle and I a while ago about connecting tribal nations. The other one, that's probably the most important one. And I'm thinking about Dennis Toddy. I'm thinking about Jamie Patton, and I'm looking for somebody else that might be up on that one. Does anyone want to talk about broader impacts?
We also have a kind of ongoing discussion with Earth Partnership, and there's something that's a little bit too. I was, hoping that we would be able to bring it into this proposal, but it looks like that, these relationships move slowly. But I mean, next week I'm going to Madison, and I'm going to be going up to the Menominee Nation, and Chris Cruzy has been helping organize that. And there was a previous proposal that was put in together with, but it's the feedback we have is that trying to push that into this proposal and the timeline is kind of too soon. Okay. But what I was imagining that we could do is try to write something that would be, if that, basically talking about like that we will pursue that relationship, and if that, hopefully during the time frame of the Institute, something like that could be nurtured. So I would, and then we could try to budget things to be, flexible, and then separately, whatever things that we can flesh out in that amount of time, and with the existing relationships that are already built, we can try to incorporate that directly. But I do think that there are some opportunities, especially there's on the forestry side there, but we can't really be super specific about it now. But what we could be specific about would be to have, for instance, set aside participant costs for some kind of listening sessions and things that would kind of set the get going. But there are other people that do this more thoroughly and professionally. So whatever ideas they have there, I'm super happy to, but I'm just throwing out the part that, that I think we could do as the bit that I've thought through.
Ping, is that a good time for you to jump in on engagement and listening sessions, since that's what you do for a living?
Yes, I would be more than happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
And I wonder if that also ties in, and not to volunteer Kai-Ping or myself or our group, but I wonder if there's some natural connections from the intellectual merit of the outreach part that also links down to the broader impacts, because the long-term, Kyle, what you just mentioned, the long-term conversations that then lead, to how product development happens with farmers in native communities and so on and so forth. That's stuff that requires long-term engagement that an institute like this can do, that a normal project cannot do. Yet again, emphasizing this, what are we buying ourselves with the institute nature of this that we otherwise can't do? So that would be a nice tie-in on a whole bunch of things on that topic.
Yeah. That sounds great. I'm wondering if this would be a, Rob was talking about small little mini topical groups that it seems like this is a good one, and we can, so I'm just on a different doc that I will share soon. I'm connecting these notes, so I just put something along those lines. I also think it's important what you mentioned, the kind of connecting the intellectual merit to the outreach side, especially since one of our 3 themes has this trustworthy one. I think that is not something that should be factorized into different parts, but really integrated. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the broader impacts. That's a good idea, Kyle, because I think that's going to be our struggle right now, is fleshing that out. Several of us have extension appointments, and we can connect to the traditional ag community, but we need to reach beyond that for this grant. Chris, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I just have a question that's not related to the content of the proposal, but the process of putting it together. And I don't have access to the drive yet, so if this is already obvious, I apologize. But I'm wondering if, in addition to having small groups working on the objectives and topics and technologies we're developing through this proposal, if we also need a small team that's just working on the logistics of getting this done on time. And
yes.
While I have no technical abilities, I'd be happy to be on the dates and deadlines and timeline side of getting this produced. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I think we absolutely do. At least when I've done previous mega grants like this, we should have set this up a month ago. That's on me. I've basically swamped with moving and buying houses and various things. So that all should have been set up. And I was also hoping that I could ask if you would take a role there. I don't know why you're not invited to this thing. I'm doing that.
It's a mistake. I already added you, Chris. You should get some sort of email soon. Okay, well then we'll get those documents made that Kyle and I think start thinking, some of you, about the budget and writing. And then I think that the broader impacts is something we really need to focus on.
In terms of the data management plans and postdoc mentoring things, I think that those are I mean, they need to happen and they're important, but they're not like the data management plan can be relatively, there is another NSF AI Institute, which is about like, or it's like a cyber infrastructure, et cetera, related to climate and ag and forestry, et cetera, but it's funded through more of like a cyber infrastructure side. They have a lot of overlap. At one point when we were first thinking about what we might do with the Institute, we thought about actually like providing some of that infrastructure, but there's already a big NSF thing. So I think that's in terms of partners, that's another group to try to reach out to and see if we can connect with them, and then they can maybe help, we'll just partner with them on the cyber infrastructure, side of things, but.
Okay, so I think we kind of have some clarity. Does anyone expect some emails, some follow up with some of the links? If you're not able to get to that Google Drive, let me know. I will get you added. I thought I had everyone, but I obviously not. Anything else people have questions about or need clarification on or anything? I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Yeah.
Yes. So, are we going to organize like dialogue between the domain and the data scientists? And so there are some specific questions for me. So I'm working on the soil science part. So I do have a lot of staff that need help from the AI, from the foundational AI improvements.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm making a document right now, which is trying to group these topics and trying that hopefully we can just use to kind of organically get people to pair up in terms of the domain, et cetera. And then we can try to have like a somewhat structured prompts in terms of questions so that maybe then people can get together and we'll put a deadline and come back with some kind of, notes from what the outcome of that discussion that hopefully can then be incorporated. Does that sound good?